When it comes to a person's stance on complexity in a video game, I think that everybody falls into one of two distinct camps. The first camp revels in this complexity. The more interconnected systems that a game has and the more there is to learn and memorize, the more game there is for you to enjoy. Or there's the second camp, where you don't care for all those systems and all you want to do is master a set of well-crafted controls while paying little attention to anything else. That's not to say that complexity versus simplicity is a purely binary state, since any game can land in any place between these two extremes, and it's not even a purely objective thing to try to talk about either. But lately, the idea of complexity versus simplicity has been on my mind with various games that I've picked up in the past year or two. So writing this script and creating this video is a bit of an attempt at trying to deconstruct the reasons why I've been unable to really get into certain games that don't really have anything wrong with them. If this video makes little coherent sense by the end, I apologize, but I'll do my best here. Before we really get started, I want to give a couple of examples of what I see as simple and complex. For an extreme example of simplicity, there's Dive Kick or One Finger Death Punch. But if you dial that forward just a little bit, you get games like Hollow Knight and Super Metroid, where, in spite of their large worlds, are easy to pick up and play without really knowing anything about them. You move, you attack, you explore, you collect items. Simple. Overwatch is another example, and though it's slightly more complex than its grandfather, Quake 3 Arena, you don't really need to know much more than move, aim, shoot, and go to the objective. Approachability is one of the defining traits of a simple game. Controls are quick to learn, easy to remember, are intuitive, and perhaps familiar to many games you've played in the past. So picking it up on a whim is something that doesn't take a whole lot of time or energy, and you can often get in, play for an hour, and be satisfied by the end of that hour. It's the perfect kind of game for a gamer with a busy life, and it also happens to be perfect for a person who loves to try lots of different games without having to get invested in every single one of them. As for the complex side of things, for another extreme example, look no further than Dwarf Fortress, whose complexity is legendary. But again, dialing that back just a little bit, you get 4X games like the Civilization series, with its wide array of buildings, civilizations, systems, and ways to win, and most MOBAs that exist in the market, especially those with a wide array of heroes, a large selection of items, and especially those with out-of-match stat progression on top of all of that. Games like these often require a lot of investment to even begin to understand or compete. Because of this significant time investment, and I don't really have any real evidence to support this, I'm pretty sure most people who spend a lot of time playing MOBAs stick to one at a time. Whether it's League of Legends, or Dota 2, or Smite, or Master x Master, the roster of characters and items to memorize, and metagame strategies and builds to remember, and even mechanics are way too vast and complex to even begin to think about splitting your time and attention between two or more of them on a regular basis. And their communities are filled with veteran players who know so much about the game that it can be downright intimidating sometimes to even think about trying to compete with them. Like I said earlier, complexity versus simplicity isn't binary, and even some of the games that I brought up for simplicity ramp up slightly in complexity as you progress through the game. And finally, to have any meaningful discussion about this topic, we should also bring up depth, which can be sort of explained by asking the question, okay, so now I know how to play this game, what else is there to learn, and how can I master what I already know? This could be anything from hidden mechanics to studying metagames to mastering certain glitches. Super Metroid and the Smash Bros. Series, with their difficult-to-master movement systems, are great examples of simple games with a ton of depth. Sitting next to MOBAs with their wide array of systems to master, and synergies to discover, and strategies to execute. It's important to note that depth can be present in a simple game, and depth can be present in a complex game. Perhaps there exists more simple games without depth than complex ones without depth, but it's less a function of the number of systems that exist in the game's design and more of a function of something else. It's hard to say exactly what that is because I don't really know, But maybe it's more about how much care and thought and skill was put into designing the systems a game has, and paying attention to interconnectivity, synergies, and high skill floor abilities such as Samus's wall jumps and shine sparks. Knowing that a game's simplicity doesn't necessarily preclude depth, which is better, simple games or complex ones? Unfortunately, I don't have any real factual answers to this either, but it's not because I don't know. The real answer is just that it depends. My own taste in games has shifted quite a lot over the years, and it's probably no surprise to most of you that I tend towards simplicity these days. When I try to dig in and figure out why, I think it might come down to a matter of time, age, and mental energy. I'm a grown man with a full-time job, with time-consuming YouTube and voice acting hobbies that I wish to one day turn into a full-blown career. I have friends that I want to hang out with, auditions to do, chores and errands to finish, 9+ hours to commit to my mentally taxing job 5 days a week, a workout regimen to stick to, scripts to write, videos to edit, TV shows to watch, and so many games to play. I don't really have the time or energy to sit down and commit to just studying how a game works for an hour before I can actually start to feel like I'm enjoying it. I don't have the willpower right now to keep up on the current tier lists of heroes in my favorite MOBA. I don't want to sit there and sort through my inventory for minutes at a time trying to sift the good stuff out of the pile of garbage I inevitably pick up. I just want to play. So for me and my schedule and my life, simpler games are perfect for me. And even though longer simple games such as Hollow Knight require a realistic commitment to playing it if you hope to beat it, there's a different kind of commitment. There's no studying required, no sorting to do, no real tiers to worry about it. It's always approachable. I can pick it up on a whim or after a small break and be actually playing the game within about a minute or two, allowing myself to become immersed in the experience. Both kinds of games can have varying levels of depth in them, and they tend to introduce depth differently from each other. Take a MOBA like League of Legends, for example. Mastery comes in knowing what all the heroes are capable of, how to counter your enemies, which items and summoner spells to take for your build, and how to play the map safely and effectively while staying aware of enemy movements. Its depth comes in the myriad of different builds, team compositions, build orders, strategies, and synergies and team plays. For the most part, it's all based on stats and numbers and careful study of what everything in the game is capable of. This is something that in my past, I was very heavily drawn to, especially in my college years. When I was super into Smite, for example, I would obsessively read every single patch note so I wouldn't be caught off guard by a new change. When I played WoW seriously, I would spend a ton of time carefully poring over my character's talent trees to find fun and clever builds that I would enjoy. When I played Magic the Gathering, I would carefully read every single card that came with a brand new set, so I could start coming up with ideas to build interesting decks with fun synergies, and then build it digitally and spend hours test drawing my first hand, just to make sure it felt good and played consistently before I ever started building it physically. Compare that to the kind of depth that comes with a game like Hollow Knight or Super Metroid. Like I mentioned before, sitting down to play requires little to no investment on your part. You pick up the controller and you know how to move and act quick enough to play without any guidance. And although it's simple, the depth can be found in slowly mastering the abilities you're given as you play. And maybe you discover how to wall jump in Super Metroid and use that to break the game's sequence for the first time. Maybe you discover how to cross Hollow Knight's areas faster and faster as you become more intimate with the dash and crystal heart abilities. Sure, it may not seem like a whole lot on the surface, but these things add just enough depth to keep these very simple games engaging throughout their runtime and subsequent playthroughs. And it's too bad, too, because I've had many people request my opinion on games like Paragon or Master X Master, and even though I've tried them, the upfront investment that these games are asking from me just make it impossible for my brain to want to bother with them at all right now. So rather than make a video about them, I decided to make a video about why instead. So far in this video, I've been speaking about simplicity and complexity as if they're mutually exclusive states on a single scale. that a game can only be completely complex or entirely simple. While you're probably better off saying a game as a whole is just one or the other, you can dig a little bit deeper at each individual design choice and game mechanic that a game has to offer. Each one can be in itself simple or complex, regardless of whether the game is considered simple or complex itself overall. But something interesting happens when you mix and match varying levels of complexity among the different systems of a game. This is probably best explained with an example. I'm going to start with an example of a poorly mixed set of system complexities within a game I recently played called Victorum. If this game looks cool to you, I'd urge you to check out my review, but I'll save you the time right now and just say it's not a very good game, and this is one of the reasons why. Victorum is a relatively simple game. You explore different mountaintops and cast a wide array of spells at enemies and buildings. Occasionally, the enemies will reward you with loot, which you then need to go to your inventory to check out. This inventory system represents a poorly developed set of systems within varying degrees of complexity that don't complement each other at all. First off, the core gameplay is simple and bombastic. In any given moment, you're not liable to notice any of the many stats you'll find on these items. You have resistances for each element, damage increases for each element, shaping bonus, damage bonus, mana regeneration, mana amount, armor, spell effects, stamina, health, range, and the list goes on. And that's not even going into the spell rune system and how complex that can be. It's enough different stats to make games like Diablo 2 jealous, without any of the supporting design and systems that made it work there. In Victorum, I was rarely excited to find loot because unless it was an obviously massive upgrade, you're sitting there comparing a small subset of stats against a possibly completely different small subset of stats and trying to gauge which one is better and why without having any real frame of reference. Every other system surrounding this game's inventory and stat systems are far too simple to make the complexity of these decisions worthwhile. And most of the time, it just becomes boring and tedious busywork to manage the inventory. What Victorum needed, as far as the inventory is concerned at least, the gameplay still sucks, was systems that were as simple and bombastic as the game itself. Far less loot drops to the point where finding a new item is something to look forward to, where every single item is a powerful game changer in various ways. Consolidate the stats, get rid of the ones that are boring or useless. Simplify it to match the systems around it. And this is just an example of what can happen when you attach complexity to something simple that doesn't really need it. The result ends up feeling like things were just slapped on to give the game an illusion of depth, when in reality it just winds up becoming a tedious chore with an overload of information that you don't really care about. Of course, I won't sit here and tell you that combining simplicity with complexity is always a bad thing, but it needs to be done cleanly and in a way that the systems complement each other rather than get in each other's way. Done badly, tossing complexity on simplicity results in what I just talked about. On the other hand, tossing simplicity on top of complexity can result in a frustrating feeling of a lack of control. Imagine an RPG with a complicated array of stats and skills, but with no way to affect a majority of them through normal means like equipment or level ups. Ultimately, an important thing to remember about video games is that they're a composition of different forms of media. They combine visual artistry, storytelling, and acting all through a lens of interactive control on the player's part. Not only do these huge pieces need to fluidly complement each other, but so does each building block of each individual piece. Often when something doesn't fit correctly, people will notice, and that tends to reflect poorly. Making sure that a game's varying levels of complexity within its systems remain complementary to one another is just as important as any other piece of the puzzle that is game development. At the end of the day, the choice of complexity versus simplicity isn't quite as cut and dry as this video's title might have implied. Complexity's brand of fun is just different from simplicity's brand of fun, and they can be combined carefully to create something new, interesting, and compelling. It's just a matter of taste, and at least in my case, available time to invest, and neither is objectively worse than the other. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts. First, which style do you tend towards these days, and did you ever enjoy the opposite style? And I'd especially love to read about any games you perceive to have a poorly mixed set of systems, similar to my story about Victorum. If nothing else, it could be a good thought experiment on about what may have gone wrong in that game and why. Special thanks to my Patreon backers, especially those you see at the bottom of the screen right now. And thank you for watching. If you liked or disliked the video, you know what to do. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter at ingeniousclown and subscribe for more awesome gaming content here in the future, and I will see you next time.